So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, whatever it is for you as a pastor, as a fellow pastor, or even if you're just a human being who is choosing to tune into this podcast. Welcome. This is Rooted, the podcast. And if you listened to last week's podcast, or the one that I did on what to do on Monday, the day after the sermon, you know that there's going to be a part two to that, and that would have been right now, actually. But there's something I want to talk to you about that is going to preempt that part two of what to do on Monday when you feel depressed and think your sermon sucked and all of that. I want to talk about an experience that my wife and I had just a week and a half ago, because I think it might be encouraging to you. She had her first annual cancer scan. She was declared cancer-free last year, but you have to, as many of you know who have experienced cancer or know people who have experienced cancer, you have to come back and have an annual scan or 6-month scan or whatever. And so this was our first one. We went in the morning to U of M, very early in the morning. I'd gotten back from a speaking trip of sorts to Albany, New York, and the flight made it in. We get up early, went to U of M, and got the scan, and then we were supposed to meet with the surgeon and have him give us the radiologist report at 11 a.m. And when we got to the surgeon, he said, look, I looked at the scan, there looks like there's something there, which of course is a red flag. He said, I don't really think it's anything. It doesn't look like a hot spot, a hot cancer spot, but I really want the radiologist to read this. And so we chatted for a bit, and then he said he would call us the rest of the day, or sometime later in the day. Well, he got busy, of course, and the radiologist hadn't read the scan, and so we didn't hear, and of course we're in limbo, and your mind goes where it goes, and you begin to think the worst. And finally, he didn't call that night, late afternoon, so we called over there. They said they'd get back to us finally at 11 o'clock the next morning, after 36 hours of being what I would call an emotional hell, or at least emotional purgatory. I'm wondering if the worst was going to be our news, like many, I'm sure, heard that day about their PET scan, because there were many of us getting that same scan there that day at U of M in the cancer center. Or would we hear something more along the lines of what we were asking for, and that would be Carla's clean scan and healing and such. And so we finally got the news that they saw the spot was nothing, apparently just some fat in her neck that had accumulated around the scar tissue or whatnot, but that she had a clean scan. They saw no signs of metastatic disease. And of course we fell into each other's arms, and we started to sob, literally, just weeping in each other's arms, thanking God. And then immediately we both started praying for those who, again, might not get that same news, and just asking for God's mercy. Didn't know what else to pray for, but just to pray for God's mercy. A couple of things that hit me about this experience that I thought might be encouraging for you. First of all, I just felt the Lord saying to me during that 36 hours, you've got to re-surrender Carla like you had to surrender her a couple of years ago when she first found out she had cancer. You can't love someone that you're controlling or that you're hanging on to. You're going to have to trust me with her. She's not yours. She's mine first. And I'm not going to tell you whether I'm going to heal her or not. You have got to keep surrendering that news to me. You're not going to know that. That's between me and her. But what I can tell you is that I love you. I love you so much, son. And I love Carla. And I'm going to be with you. Because I love you, I'm not going to leave you. I didn't leave you back then through all the cancer treatments and the first couple of scans, and I'm not leaving you now, even though you are lusting after this news. Of course we are. We want to know. He said, I'm not leaving you now. I'm right here with you. So I just had to remind myself that this thing about surrender is constant. Whatever it is you're going through today, one of the key words, one of the key behaviors with your relationship with God, like with mine, is to turn it over. Sounds so simple. It is so difficult. And I I truly believe we can't turn something over unless we know that we're loved and cared for and that He's present. Otherwise, we're turning something over. We're surrendering something into a vacuum. And I'm not doing that. But if I know He loves me and if I know He's with me, then I can surrender. Another thing that I learned or relearned or whatever, I was talking to my friend Audrey, who is one of the chapters in the book, Choose and Choose Again, The Brave Act of Returning to God's Love, that some of you have read, knowing that I have written that book, about our journey to heal and know the love that fills us up from Christ. And she, of course, has battled with a very difficult form of MS for quite a few years and has had to continue to try to surrender herself to a God that she's trying to believe loves her in spite of the fact that He continues to say no in terms of healing her of this illness. And in fact, the illness has had some, there have been some ways in which it has increased significantly over the years. And she said to me, because Carla, my wife, had felt so guilty about the fact that she was emotionally distraught through this period of time, and she was feeling really all kinds of negative emotions, she would say, and anger and whatnot, and grouchiness. She actually used the word grouchy. I was feeling grouchy. I shouldn't have felt grouchy. I should have trusted God. And Audrey said to me, Kev, she said, tell Carla, or just take this into yourself, Kevin, because you probably have some of the same feelings. Trust isn't a feeling, it's a choice. So we can have all kinds of feelings. Feelings aren't moral. It's what comes to us as human beings. Jesus had feelings in the garden. He had feelings about the cross. He had feelings about the way His disciples responded to Him in the garden, Peter, James, and John. He had feelings about the way Israel rejected Him. He had feelings about his best friend Lazarus dying and the Pharisees not getting it, that He was the resurrection and the life, and that death one more time had taken something that was sacred to His Father and to Himself. He had feelings, but He chose to trust. And so Audrey says, you can feel whatever you want. Be angry, scream, shout at the heavens, be grouchy. But in the midst of that emotion, choose to trust. And I was able to go back to Carla, and we just dialogued about it. And I said, baby, when we look at the Psalms, isn't it true that David, talk about grouchy, talk about anger, David had those feelings, but even at the end of the Psalms, most of the Psalms of lament, he was able to say, but I trust in you. He chose to trust. That's profound stuff. I don't know where you are today in your journey as a parent, maybe, as a spouse, as a single person, as a pastor, with your church, with your board, with your kids, with your salary, with a parishioner that's just driving you out of your minds, with your own feelings of shame. Feel what you feel. Feelings tell you something. They need to be paid attention to, but they don't tell you everything, and they don't get to control us. You can choose to trust. You can choose to surrender. You can choose to take another step into the healing that your Abba Father is calling you to, so that you'll be able to know how much He loves you. You'll be able to experience that love, and then to be able to turn over that human being that you just can't abide anymore, or the struggle in your marriage, or the fears you have about something physical or emotional or spiritual, or about your future, or some shame about your past. You'll be able to surrender it because, and you'll be able to trust because you know you're loved and you know you're not alone. The last thing that Audrey said that I thought was so profound, she said, the older I get, the more pain that I see around me, the more I am able to be honest about my own pain, my own frustration, and sometimes near despair. The more I see, I think it's harder to trust. I have to work harder to trust. I always thought it would be easier to trust the older that I got. She said, I think it's been harder. She said, I think life used to be a whole lot simpler. And I thought, you know what? I'm so glad you called that out, Audrey, because I've thought, here I've been a believer for 60 years, and really deeply moved into the love of Jesus for the last 30, and have been really following more who I think the real Jesus is for 30 years. and healing and going to therapy and walking with brothers and sisters in intimate relationship, and yet I sometimes feel like it's more complex today than it's ever been. It's just more of a struggle to trust. But I guess I wanted to say to you, I think that is the way it is. I'm just thinking out loud here with you. I don't know what it was like for Jesus to trust when he just was first baptized and went into the wilderness compared to what it was like in the garden. But I've got a sense maybe that the more he was into his earthly journey, the more he had to wrestle with the Father in terms of laying down his journey before him. And so I guess I want to encourage you, whatever you're going through today, feel what you feel. You can choose to trust if you know that you're loved and you know that he's with you. But also be patient with yourself as you wrestle with the fact that maybe it's a little harder than you thought it was going to be. Maybe you thought that you were going to be further along the journey. Maybe it's not about maturity. Maybe maturity is creating space inside yourself to see more of the pain, and the pain hits you a little bit differently, a little bit more deeply, a little more profoundly, your own and the pain around you in the world. So maybe it is more complex. Maybe that's a sign of maturity. The difficulty to choose to trust is a sign not of immaturity, but maturity. So I'm not going to restate all of that to kind of encapsulate it like I might in a sermon. This is just a podcast. It's just me sharing my heart with you. I hope some of what I've shared is encouraging to you today. Let me just close by saying, God loves you so very, very, very much. You are his son. You are his daughter. You are precious to him. He is with you. You are not alone. I'm praying that you can trust him today, that you can really surrender and know that he's there and that he's got you. Take care. We'll talk soon.